Welcome to the fifth and final hour of User Interface Strategies 93. Joining me are Marilyn Mantei of University of Toronto and Tom Furness of University of Washington. I've enjoyed listening to the talks during the last few hours, and I've got lots of questions, but we're going to try to deal with some questions that we've been getting in from the fax and on the telephone. Several people have asked for further references about materials, and I just want to go through for each of us. In the back of my handouts are two papers that give further details about the projects that we've been doing. The university, there's information from the university's Office of Technology Liaison, which is licensing the TreeViz application on the Macintosh. Someone asked about PC toolkits for developing tree maps. Our tree maps were developed on the Mac and on the Sun workstations. We think the ideas are quite generic, and we've published the basic algorithms, and we'd be glad to help you with them, but we think that anybody who's a competent programmer can figure out the ways to make the tree maps work in new environments with relative ease. So we want to encourage you to go try it. We know of at least two implementations, one at Georgia Tech and one at AT&T in Illinois. And I'm sure others will be coming along to try to apply their own ideas to that method. We do have a toolkit on the PCs for the touchscreen interfaces and for the widgets and sliders that you saw there. We had to build our own double box widget because we couldn't find any that in any of the toolkits that we looked at. And that seemed to be necessary for the kind of applications that we were trying to do. Questions about references for Marilyn's work, I do want to refer you again to the proceedings of the Computer Supported Cooperative Work Conference just finished, available from ACM in New York. And another source would be the new journal from Kluwer Academic Publishers called Computer Supported Cooperative Work. This just began publishing during the last few months, and it will be another resource. Now, there were also specific questions about some of the products that Marilyn mentioned during her session, and she's kindly volunteered to draw together a list with references, and she'll be glad to send them to you if you send your email address to her, and I think we're going to put the email address up on the screen. There we come. Mantei @FLIS, which stands for
Faculty of Library and Information Science
at universityoftoronto.ca for Canada.
I get less mail there, so it ensures that you'll get answered.
So that's a very personal way to establish contact with Marilyn, and also she will give her a few days to put it together, but she would be glad to send that out. For Tom Furness, also, I will repeat the further source of information would be the journal that he's co-editor of called Presence, and it's available from MIT Press, jointly edited with Tom Sheridan, one of the grand leaders of field. Tom, are there other sources you wanted to mention?
Well, certainly there's a new conference that is coming up, being sponsored by the IEEE, that will be held in Seattle in September of '93. It's the very first, I guess you would say, scholarly conference dealing with virtual reality. Mm-hmm. It's called VRAIS, V-R-A-I-S, French for Truth. In '93, it actually is an acronym for Virtual Reality Annual and International Symposium. And that will be in Seattle in September of '93. I believe it's the 16th through the
18 through 22, it says in the announcement here.
And I'm the general chairman for that conference. Then, indeed, there will be one in '94 about the same time of year held in Disney World.
Interesting choice of location, which brings us to some of our other questions. I understand we have some questions on the telephone. Let's start with that. We have that ready? Please identify yourself.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, it's Bob McLean in Toronto, at the University of Toronto in Canada. I have a question for Tom Furness or Ben Shneiderman, trying to integrate their two presentations. Ben showed us several instances of allowing the user to control the processes of rendering data or model so that we could have the computer amplify our attention. But in virtual reality, the prototypical interaction is moving around in a virtual environment. Are there examples in VR where the user can control the rendering of the model, thus letting the computer help focus our viewpoint by eliminating, emphasizing, or highlighting features of the virtual environment?
Thanks, Ben. Well, Bob, you already know that answer. Of course, you can do all of the above. As a matter of fact, what we would like to do, and in all of our applications, is understand the task the user or participant is trying to perform. And in doing so, tailor the environment, whether it be a real environment or a virtual environment, to accommodate that. We feel that one of the advantages of being immersed into a virtual environment means that we can rapidly build an internal model, or we can get higher bandwidth to the brain as discussed before. But I see one of the beauties of being in a virtual world is that you can rapidly construct an environment based upon the task that is being performed, and hopefully use that to focus our attention and indeed the bandwidth that we need to perform this particular task, given a way that the computer can tailor that information for us. You remember the slide that I showed of the newspapers, the stack of newspapers? Well, I believe in the future, and Marilyn may also feel the same, in order for us to be able to handle the vast amount of information that will be available to us, we have to have intelligent agents that serve us. One of the functions of those intelligent agents may be to go into very complex databases, pull out and filter things, and then re-represent those to us in a virtual world, where we might see that database in the form of a museum that we are able to tour, or some other place that we might visit.
Now, wait a minute, Tom. I got a couple of problems with your answer to that. By that description, it sounds like there's no limits to what VR is. VR is everything. It includes all of computing and all of information visualization and scientific visualization. Are there bounds to what you would say is included?
Are there bounds to human intelligence? Basically, I believe that virtual reality is really no more, is just an extension to computing that gives us a means of linking our intelligences more effectively to a computational machine. And basically, our organs represent our brain to the computer. The retina of our eye, the sensors in our hand, the receptors in our hands, receptors in the cochlea of our ear. Now the question is, how do we best get the ones and zeros in the computer into those sensory end organs? I believe virtual reality as an interface is just a more effective way of getting now those sensory end organs stimulated. Now the way we organize, though, that representation of data is basically a computer program. Mm-hmm. So I believe that we can synthesize and create worlds that are the limits of our imagination.
Well, I appreciate the ambition, but I'm still, I must say, troubled by some of the vagueness of it that suggests that it includes all of computing. And I'm looking for some clearer definition. I'm also troubled by your reference to agent, or during your hour, you talked about the growing intelligence in the machine, the mind of the computer, and the brain of the computer. And I think more and more people are coming to question that model, and that I don't see, personally, that computers are intelligent. That they're no more intelligent than a wooden pencil. And I think that the future of computing is of predictable, controllable interfaces where the user's in charge and operates the machine and can predict what will happen in an orderly way. So I would be opposed to the idea and the metaphor of the machine being intelligent.
I think I would disagree a little bit with that, because I do believe that certainly some of the applications of computing have to be deterministic. In other words, we have to predict. Otherwise, we can't use the machine. On the other hand, I think we have an opportunity of exploring and growing by going into worlds that are not predictable. The whole area of artificial life, for example, where we're able to populate our virtual world, or whatever we want to call it, with entities which we endow with properties that may not be predictable. For example, linking a whole bunch of stochastic processes together. One of the things that is exciting to us now is using a program, an object-oriented program we call VIOS, the Virtual Environment Operating System, where we're trying to build a number of entities that will populate a virtual world. And these entities include inhabiting entities, where we're mapping human behavior into those entities. There's inanimate entities, which we're just giving properties of mass and reflectivity and elasticity and things like that. And then there are these intelligent entities or autonomous entities, which we're endowing with properties that basically are not predictable necessarily. They may be random in place. Now let me finish this. And then what we do is turn these loose and observe the behavior. One of the areas where this may have benefit is in understanding basic physical processes. For example, a process gas model. If you turn all of these entities loose in a volume and you change the temperature and you have now endowed these objects with some attributes and behavior that can be shared and understood, then basically you can see how that process gas models and see if it correlates and corresponds with our laws of thermodynamics.
I have no problem in building models of environments and gas molecules bouncing around and so on, but I do have some trouble with the scenario you present of living entities and artificial life as an interface component. In that I think if we look at the successful technologies, they're ones where the users are in control, and they resist the adoption of technologies where they give up control, where they cannot know what will happen next. And I see that the gains in the kind of information environments that I've offered, such as these dynamic queries, where you have remarkable control, where you can explore 1,000 or 10,000 home listings in a second. You don't need to negotiate with an agent, describe your interests and wait for feedback and then have another chat. You just do it. And you see it on the screen immediately. And that kind of empowerment, I think, will be much more attractive. Marilyn, get you in here.
I am in the middle, so I might as well enter this. I see agents as somewhere that, well, let me describe a teacher dealing with a student. Let me describe my life. You have a student that goes away and every week comes back and asks you questions about the assignment or the project and comes to your office and you give them a little guidance, and then they go away and they're intelligent and they do things for a while. They make decisions. They try to understand what you gave them. They come back. It's not quite right. You give them a little nudge this way. And you have the other student that goes away and turns in the project at the end. And some of those projects are great. And some of those, boy, you wish they had come to see you. And the problem here is that what you want is intelligent agents just to go off sometimes and take care of things. That gives you empowerment. It gives you sort of a space to understand your part of the complexity. And other times, they ought to come and see you because they aren't as intelligent as they think they are. And I think that's what the issue is.
Well, I think the metaphors we choose to talk about systems are very important in guiding designers and in conveying the message about what the systems are. And I think we'll have to just look back. We'll have to get together 5 years hence and see which way this technology emerges. I do think that the gaming environments are more conducive for the kind of surprises and explorations that you describe. But I'm not sure if in an office space, when I issue a command, if I want to get some if I wanted to trouble me or negotiate, I want to carry forward in a clear and predictable way.
Let's think about a spreadsheet in an office setting. Right now we have a spreadsheet that's crammed on a screen that big. Now, how many of you have tried to divide up that screen so that you get your spreadsheet where you put a section here and you scrunch over another section there so you can see the columns next to each other? Well, think about a spreadsheet that surrounds you, or an infinite spreadsheet.
Oh, that I think is fine.
Now we're talking about something that lets you do some things in spatially, because remember that we mapped We've mapped the location of information spatially in our head, and that's an important way to access it. And as we look around ourselves, we can take a piece of information there and put it over here. And I think that I agree with you in the sense of when we get into semantics of interface. The idea is to make the interface good enough to solve the problem, to perform the task. And I think that's why we always need to go back to the problem that is being solved. Any good interface design addresses the problem.
I very much agree with that, and I think the visual space, I'm very much in agreement with you that we are very well organized physiologically to take in visual information, and we ought to make use of that in terms of the computer environment. So I like the part of VR that deals with information presentation. Along that way, we have a question from Vincent LeBlanc at University of Montreal, who asks about the visual process, whether we feel that it's parallel or serial. He suggests that we consider vision as a serial process for a brief amount of time when the eye is first shown a fresh, unseen vision, and then it becomes parallel. And I think there's some kind of accommodation process when you're presented with a new environment, and that may take a little while, but then maybe the processing is more parallel. Would you go along with his...
I believe so. I'm not sure that I would use the term serial and parallel. I would use the terms of model building versus model accession. In other words, when you get into a new environment, let's say you walk into a new room, I believe that most of your capacity is used now, your visual capacity, perhaps building that model of the new room, of the new space, the new volume. And then after that, after you've parsed that room into its constituents of its, understand the volume and the ambiance and things like that, then that model is used to generate expectations and help you navigate in the room. And at the same time, you're building models acoustically. We're incredible processors of acoustic information. It's just like when we walk into this room, we take an impulse response function and are able to create a model in our head, analyzing very complex reflections, echoes, things like that, and still able to sort out the directionality of where sounds are coming from.
Okay. If we turn to some other questions, a couple for Marilyn here. Anna Wichansky and Deb Goldis, hello, at Silicon Graphics in California, ask, how are people working with the cameras? Do they adjust them constantly? What kinds of cameras do you use, and so on?
Okay, that's actually a very good question and something that troubled us a lot when we were using our own cameras. We actually have bought all different kinds of cameras. We decided that we couldn't choose between one or another to see whether it would be effective, so we bought camcorders, we bought just very large, high-quality mountable cameras and very cheap black and white cameras. It turns out that people like color, so we're sticking with color cameras now. We sort of settled on camcorders. One of the reasons that we settled on camcorders and we settled on a particular camcorder, the Sony camcorder, is because it has a Control-L function and it works with our video analysis tools, which isn't what everybody is really trying to do. What is difficult about our cameras is that they're awkward, they're clumsy. Some of them are masking tape to the top of the monitors. You don't have gaze. That is, you don't see the other person looking at you. What we need is the very tiny thumbnail cameras. Hewlett-Packard in England has one that's embedded inside the top of the monitor with the assumption you have a video board about, well, actually you can get color cameras about this size now. They're expensive. You get a bigger one about this size, they're less expensive. We can get a small black and white for about, well, this is Canadian prices, which means they're probably double the U.S., for about $250. So you can actually, those are better ones, and build them into your own standing workstations like the Hydra unit. And those, because the gaze makes so much difference, we recommend heading that way. And we're stuck with some of the cameras we have. We have a lot of moving around of cameras because people don't like where they're positioned. Some offices have arms where they can bring the camera down and focus it on things on papers, but because we're doing collaborative work on our screens now, we don't need to show people so much what's in our office at this point.
I want to go back to the other part of their question, which is, do people play with the cameras? Do they feel uncomfortable, or do they get acquainted with it and just leave it in place for long periods?
We have something I didn't explain in the videos I showed you. There's a picture that says mirror below it, and people can put the mirror function on. And as a matter of fact, that's what I do to comb my hair in the morning. So people do it, and they play with it, and they adjust the focus, and they decide that they don't look right this way, and so they do this on their own, and then they'll go make a video connection. Of course, connect to somebody else who hasn't played with their camera yet. One of the new nuances we see in offices with this connection is people come in and they actually do adjust the camera to what they look like as they sign onto the system. So that is important to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question from Marilyn was from Bart Priest of BCS in Richland, Washington. Using email for personal messages is an issue at our site. Is it necessary or possible to restrict these collaborative tools to work-related topics? If yes, how is usage controlled, limited, or monitored?
Well, I don't, the first answer to that question is I don't think it's possible, and I think we're moving with our technology tools like email, because monitoring means loss of privacy, and that it has a whole other issue, especially with video, that becomes enormous with people in the workspace. People are now looking at you with video cameras, and if you're using them for social functions, people are looking at you having a social interaction with somebody. So the monitoring has to go away, or some negotiation has to be made with the employees in the company to have certain rules of what kinds of things will be acceptable and not. And that means there's no control. And without control, that makes management nervous, because you have to have some control over productivity and what happens in the workspace. So there's this tension that these new technologies are bringing into play, email being one of them. What I think will happen is we'll have definitions of work and what's done being based on work product and not so much upon work time.
Sure. Is the question any different than, are people spending too much time chatting at the coffee machine? I think sometimes important work gets done, and making relationships at work is important as well.
Well, a lot of managers don't necessarily assume that, and what you can do with the coffee machine is you can walk out and look at it, and you have that information there, and you can make some comments. I've heard some stories of things like there's these active badges that you wear with they have the office is wired for radio. And some places have video also, so they take pictures of you in common rooms. And they can tell wherever you are in the company. And managers have gone to visit people that are lower than them, and they've been called in their job evaluation. They've been said, no, you don't go to that person's office, they come to your office. Yeah. That was actually presented at the CSCW conference. That sort of thing that kind of monitoring is possible, and it's a real invasion of how people run their jobs. So people have to rethink those things. Your
comments exactly in harmony with one of the questions that we have from Mexico, from the Institute of Technology and Superior Studies at Monterey. And the question is, are we getting closer to Orwell's 1984 scenario by some of these technologies?
Well, we actually had a bit of a riot at Toronto when we started putting our video. For the people who weren't part of our project, were concerned about putting video in the main laboratory where the students work, and with the idea, hey, faculty members are now going to be looking at students working, and the concept of judging whether they're working or not. And so the answer is, it's a little scary, and people have to worry about that end of the technology. We actually have a group called the Privacy Group. That group led to our door scenario. To have your door closed and keep people from just popping in when you have private discussions. And so I say that there's more potential for observation. Video, although I said it's a flat medium, is much richer than looking at people's email or looking at documents or observing their work habits. And so people need to set up some new rules for organizational behavior in that area. It's really a concern.
Well, along the fears side of the questions, we have a question from Montreal from Rob Dickinson for Tom Furness, who raises some questions about the dark side of VR and asks, please define the difference between games of violence that you referenced and the virtual cockpit that you described.
Well, the big difference, of course, is that with virtual cockpits, we kill real people. And with, as a matter of fact, that's why I'm at the University of Washington now instead of working for the Department of Defense. I felt that the taxpayers had made an investment of over $100 million in this technology that could really benefit people. And one of the reasons I decided to leave was to beat my sword into a plowshare and to be able to use the technology for beneficial means. Indeed, we have to understand in this country, though, that most of our research and development in high tech has been sponsored by the Department of Defense. It's, you could say, sort of equivalent to perhaps the MIDI in Japan. Now, hopefully that will change over the years, but nevertheless, most of the new stuff, a lot of the new stuff has come out of that environment. And virtual interfaces is no exception to that. But I think we're in a position now, and we're seeing some very interesting things happening in the Department of Defense, that many of the laboratories around the country, federal labs and especially DoD labs, are now trying to survive themselves because peace is broken out and things like that. And what this means is that they're turning attention to the issues that deal with social concerns and environmental concerns. And I think we're going to see quite a dramatic change in the nature of the work of these laboratories.
Let me use that to ask about two things. One is, would you like to describe your effort about the Virtual World Society? And I know you have a short videotape that you didn't get to show that we might take a look at about some kids developing virtual activities.
Yes, one of my agenda items in leaving the Department of Defense was to work on the area of using VR for education. As a matter of fact, I believe this is perhaps one of the most exciting application areas, the concept of a virtual classroom, where you would be able to go into a virtual Pythagorean theorem kingdom, or you'd be able to go into a virtual physics lab and play with Planck's constant and change the speed of light and sound. And in trying to begin to explore those avenues, we conducted a few projects with the Pacific Science Center. And in that, trying to find out just what kids would do with these tools of building virtual worlds. So this tape is a sort of a packaged account of our first project.
Get the red.
What color tree is this going to be?
It's not a tree.
You can see it in the eyes,
Yeah, that's it.
a certain sense of purpose, heightened concentration, attention to detail. This is a learning environment, and these are young pioneers exploring a technology that's now on the cutting edge of curriculum development. It's called virtual reality, an exciting, compelling teaching tool for the Nintendo generation. In virtual reality, the student goes beyond the classroom, stepping into the actual lesson plan itself. When a youngster dons the headgear and glove, he enters a whole new world. Maybe it's the teacher's world, or maybe it's the world created from the student's own imagination.
Move the light. Move the light.
Oh yeah, move the light.
Move the light. That was fun.
Where's that?
Move light. Where is it?
Well, let's pick a color. Why don't you pick a color from what I had?
59 Seattle area youngsters chose to experiment with virtual reality at last summer's Technology Academy at the Pacific Science Center. The kids were divided into small groups with a single mission: design a virtual world of your own creation.
It's going to be an upside down spacecraft.
You have it's gonna crash.
course.
Scientists at the University of Washington's Human Interface Technology Laboratory want to know more about how youngsters will use virtual reality. How readily will they pick up the needed technical skills? How creative can they get? Will kids enjoy this educational challenge?
Shall we go back to the world and see how it looks like?
Sure. How do you do that?
Object.
Computer expert Kelvin Chan worked with the students all summer.
Actually, it wasn't difficult for the kids. It was quite easy for them to immerse themselves into the technology, the software to create designs of objects and to create worlds. In fact, I would say, and within about 15 to 20 minutes, they were to pick up these, the knowledge to design complex objects.
The young people, called world builders, work together to invent their virtual environment. Paul's group called theirs the Virtual Valley. Working with a Macintosh computer and the graphics program Swivel 3D, the kids constructed all the objects that would populate their world. Trees and mountains, a lake, even a boat.
How do you get the world in the center of the view screen here?
Okay, move the slider a little bit more to the left and see what happens.
About there?
Probably a little bit more.
The tools and concepts are sophisticated because each graphic element must be linked to all the others. Computer scientist and project coordinator Meredith Bricken.
This isn't a technology for smart kids. This is a technology that everybody has access to. The kids with spatial skills and audio skills can use this every bit as effectively as those who are traditionally the computer users.
This is to fly. This is to fly backwards. This is to stop. Okay, let's get you in.
Some kids say it's easier to make a virtual world than to live in it.
It's different.
When the head turns, the view in the headset changes. The gloved hand directs linear motion, called flying, and can even pick up certain objects. But it's easy to get lost in the virtual valley.
Well, what's the white thing on the right?
No.
In the sky?
That,
Yeah.
I think it's a boulder in the mountain.
They understood
That's what it looks like.
that this wasn't a simulation of reality. This was a whole new kind of reality that they had control over. And by empowering them with this control, they expressed so much more than I ever expected.
Pretty neat at eye level. Feels more realistic. I'm in the water. I'm swimming. For instance, in my class, nobody else doesn't know what I'm talking about when I talk about virtual reality. They don't know about the goggles, the glove, and moving through the worlds. That's something new. It's a new experience. It's like going off to a new world altogether.
This gave them a very strong feeling of control. They learned how to shape a world and include in it who they were. And one of the beautiful parts of who they were is peaceful and whimsical and charming and full of humor.
Well, this is just one example of the experiences that we had. The kids were really enthusiastic. And we found that we could even take kids that were economically disadvantaged and put them with kids that were economically advantaged, and they were able to build links with each other by building common worlds. And it was exciting to us also that none of the worlds had any violence in them. As a matter of fact, they were peaceful worlds, and they, one of the kids said that they wanted to have a sort of build a utopia. Of course, one kid said that he wanted to, one of the things he wanted to visualize is being in a lava tube and getting blown out, you know, with the eruption of the volcano. But in our attempt to try to awaken children in this country, we feel that virtual interfaces and computing, linked with virtual interfaces, can indeed go much beyond what has happened in classrooms with the media. And we have, in that regard, organized what we call a Virtual World Society. And the Virtual World Society is really for kids and for adults. And we're trying to use this as a means of supporting educational pursuits in the classroom and at universities, sponsoring scholarships, summer camps for children to have the same experiences as these Pacific Science Center kids had. One of the things we want to do, for example, is build a fleet of vans that will travel all over the country. Perhaps 50 to 100 of these that will take this kind of technology into the school districts and into the shopping malls and into places where people will get an opportunity to see how wonderful it can be to be empowered by the computer, where they don't have to know how to use computers. They can just be their natural selves and be able to perform a number of these functions.
I do agree that computers have a great potential for education. I think that the real contribution will be empowering people to create things, to create text or make compositions of music or draw pictures or maybe make virtual worlds. But I do think that has to be framed in an educational goals environment to make sure that we don't wind up, making the content of education being video games or the exploration. I want to know, once they've gotten past the first experience of building a world, how is it supporting the direction of education? I see a question here. Brian's asking about,
yeah, I had a question about, I guess I wanted you to predict the future for us. These Las Vegas glasses you're talking about, I'd like to sit on my couch and type on my old keyboard instead of having to sit in front of my desk hunched over my computer monitor. I was just wondering, are these, I tried to keep up with this technology, but I didn't realize that it was quite that far that I could buy a pair of sunglasses. And is that coming soon? Will we be replacing monitors?
It is coming. Certainly the technology that I showed you in my presentation will be available in January to the retailers. And the production production items will be out on the market by the midsummer and by the autumn. Now, these particular devices were primarily built for video presentations as a substitute for television, a television that you wear. But the company that is producing these envisions shortly after that some OEM products that will basically be computer monitors. And the biggest boon for this, by the way, is for laptop or notebook computing. As you know, the notebook computers, especially the very high-resolution screens, the active matrix screens, are very expensive. Furthermore, they take up a lot of space and use up all the battery power, or a lot of the battery power, with the backlighting and so forth. Well, with these devices, it's very low weight, because virtual space doesn't really weigh anything, although some of the devices do, but not much. And with a few ounces, you're able to create a widescreen picture that makes your particular laptop computer display 5 to 10 times larger, but it takes up less space and weighs less and uses less power. And you'll be seeing that happen in '93.
Okay. Well, the private eye device has been around for about 4 years now. And has that gone into production with these kind of environments?
It has, but has had limited acceptance. And one of the reasons, we believe, is because the private eye is really an obtrusive device. Mm-hmm. Basically, it blocks out your vision. And also, the presentation is red, using light-emitting diodes. The new technology is certainly color, it's full color, and it is not obtrusive in that you can see the normal outside world as much as you want to, and you just look in a particular area and you see this virtual image.
Well, one more challenging question along the way of development is that a couple of days ago people were quite surprised on the network, and then apparently in the Wall Street Journal, a story about VPL, the leading company pioneered by Jaron Lanier, seems to have folded shop. What's your response to that event?
Well, certainly the troubles that VPL has had is disappointing to us. We would like to think that there's a lot of support for this kind of technology for a number of companies that are starting. But I think we have to understand that there's a lot of risk in starting a new venture. And indeed, Jaron, as a pioneer in the commercialization of this technology, took a significant amount of risk, and as a lot of these ventures go, get heavily into debt. And the reason I believe that VPL has had this experience is because of business practices rather than interest in the virtual technology. The concern in the Wall Street Journal article was that indeed the major investor in VPL is Thomson CSF, a French company, and the 20-some-odd patents that VPL holds in this technology may end up going to the French. My response to that is I'm not really worried too much about it, because I believe that we have more than enough technology that really transcends that, the VPL work. But we're hoping that in the end that there will be a healthy and robust business environment, as reflected in the Business Week article on virtual reality recently.
Right. Okay, I turn to a question from IBM in San Jose from, let's see, I don't see the person's identification here, but they ask about the dynamic queries that I described, and what I showed on the screen was, in fact, the conjunct of disjuncts. The queries that I constructed with, for example, that dynamic home finder were showing a range of values for cost and a range of values for bedrooms and the choice between, let's say, houses or condominiums and so on. And the question is, can we make more generic queries that combine Boolean connectors of ands and ors and parentheses? And that is an issue that we have wrestled with for maybe 20 years. In your handouts, I include a paper where we talk about the dynamic queries, and if we can have the slide overhead, I took the image from that handout which shows one of the possible solutions for doing generic Boolean queries through what we call the filter and flow method. The assumption is that there's a flow of records from the top of the screen and it passes through each of the filters. The first filter asks for a selection of ors. That is, you're choosing a college and you want a college which has English or literature or journalism departments. And then you see the fork or split in the flow. Actually, you should notice the flow is thinned because that eliminated many colleges. And then we have a branch to the left where we now go into a filter that has a slider that asks that allows only low-cost universities to be included. And on the right side branch, we have a filter which selects high class, but then high cost, excuse me, high cost colleges, but then also has scholarship availability. The width of the flow at each point indicates the number of records that have passed through that filter. They then recombine and then come to deliver the results on the bottom of the screen. And in this mock-up, we show that 3 universities have been selected and they're on the map of the U.S., which presumably you could zoom or pan to see other possible choices. So this way of showing ands and ors seems to take care of many of the situations of Boolean queries. We also have the concept of a clustering, that you can take a section of the screen and replace it with a single block, and so you could have very complex queries and you could then put them together in a blockwork mechanism and build arbitrarily complex Boolean queries. We've built that as a prototype. We've run controlled experimental studies. People really do succeed very well with the filter flow model, whereas they have great difficulty with the traditional SQL typing of queries. So while our solution's not perfect and complete, we think it provides a good starting point, and we're pleased and we encourage others to pick up on that idea and implement further variations. I've got some more questions here. Jean Gayson from Virginia Commonwealth University, hi Jean, asks for Tom that if all the inputs necessary to a pilot to navigate an aircraft can be represented electronically, why do we need the pilots?
A very good question. This is one of the questions we've had to deal with over the years. Certainly if we knew exactly what was going to happen, for example, exactly what the enemy would do, exactly the way our particular systems would operate, the effectiveness of our systems, then we could program a drone to do that mission. But that's not really what happens. Apparently, and the whole idea of warfare is surprise and is of change, and what we have to have are adaptive elements within the loop, actually elements that can handle the uncertainty, and the pilots are there to handle uncertainty. And actually it's particularly a good feeling to know that there's a human that has a finger on the trigger rather than a machine in some cases. because we've seen that machines can indeed make mistakes because of interpretation of information out of context. An example of that is what has happened to NORAD several times. When NORAD has received information from the BMUS sites, the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, which indicated that there was a massive launch of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And as a result of that, alerted our whole Strategic Air Command and Ballistic Missile Force that there was indeed a threat, or that there was an impending launch of these missiles, or that a missile launch had happened. And indeed what it was some noise that had gotten into the system, or someone, I think, had mounted the wrong tape, I believe, at NORAD headquarters and ran an exercise that ended up on the... I think the bottom line is that we want to have a combination of human adaptive elements and machine elements in a system that are able to perform the function. Now, hopefully in the end we can remove the human elements from the threat, from the risk area. And the whole intent, the long-term intent behind the super cockpit was to move the pilot physically from the airplane. And indeed that adaptive element would be located in a safe place. But the aircraft, for all intents and purposes, would be out there flying with the pilot in the loop.
Okay. Well, we don't have too much time more, but I do have a couple more questions right here. This from Mexico, again, the Monterey Institute of Technology. David Alanis asks, how does virtual reality affect our mind from the physiological point of view?
Well, I'm certainly not a student of brain chemistry or anything like that, but I do believe that some of the interfaces that we will have to computers, and indeed computers that are running virtual reality, will be non-psychomotor interfaces. In other words, we will be measuring biopotentials. We will be looking at behavior in the sense of chemistry, electrochemistry that's taking place in the body. In our work several years ago at Wright-Patterson, we were using devices called SQUIDs, superconducting quantum interference devices, that were being used to measure very small, minute electromagnetic fields that were emanated by the brain when charge was being transferred from one part of the brain to another, as different from electroencephalography. Magnetoencephalography allowed us to identify the origins of these signals. And from that, we were able to basically measure things that were going on in the brain and use them to activate functions. So I believe that we will see more and more input to computers taking place at higher and higher levels in our brain function. In terms of how it can affect our brain, it's interesting that we've had a number of psychologists and psychiatrists contact us, that they're interested in using VR in therapy. Because one of the things that can be done, for example, in therapy is that you can create an environment that may be less obtrusive, or can be more benign to a patient. For example, a person who is afraid of speaking in front of audiences, or a person who has acrophobia or claustrophobia, that you can manipulate the environment systematically to basically desensitize them to these kind of situations.
One of the questions takes us a little further on the issue that I started about the evaluation of computer-supported collaborative environments. Could you give us some pointers and stories about evaluations that have been done and what kind of methods they've used? I think of the University of Arizona studies and your earlier studies with the Capture Lab. Could you talk about those and add to those?
I think at this point, evaluation of the studies of these kinds of meeting rooms and of meeting in general is actually at its very infancy. We can't say too much about what's happening. A lot of it is ad hoc and sort of intuitive case studies of what's happened. And that's because there are some problems with looking at how people adapt to technology and work with technology that deal with having them adapt to it over a long period of time. And if you look at people in one meeting, or you look at them coming in and filling a questionnaire after the meeting, you're not getting what's really happening in this area, because meetings and people are social organizations. You need to measure them as an organization that takes place over time and over a continuum. You need well-formed sets of people. You need to study multiple sets of those people, and you need to follow them, and that is a lot of work.
I'm going to ask for specifics about where research is being done. Again, I think of Arizona. I think of yourself. Belcour in New Jersey.
The University of Arizona is doing some work with their meeting room and going off-site as well as on-site in their meeting room, doing lots of longitudinal studies. University of Michigan has a collaboration suite where they're doing studies. They're doing some very, very nice analysis of videotape and what happens with people using collaborative tools. People are looking at decision-making in the Capture Lab, Electronic Data Systems. We're doing some anthropology studies on the use of media space with corporations that have agreed to put this in, our technology in. We also have done some studies on ourselves. There's some studies that are going on in Europe. Certainly Europark has been looking at themselves and looking at what's happening in sites which have installed this kind of environment. There's also some work in Germany there's some work in Darmstadt, Germany with GMD-IPSI. There's a lot of work in Japan on media spaces, and a lot of companies have been working on it for the last 5 years using these video connections and computers. Not just NTT, but NEC, Hitachi, Fujitsu, all of these companies are working on it, and it's a major push for them.
I like ending on the note about dealing with the questions of evaluation, and I'd like to put that back on Tom's desk also, and just encourage, as I did with my opening slide, I think this field will progress more rapidly. We will get more better ideas and be able to disseminate our work more effectively if we do the kind of scientific studies that I think have led the way in many areas. I know in our own work with our own classroom and the information visualization tools that we've developed, we just find every time we do a study, it sharpens our attention about the design of the systems, what tasks it's good for, and when it's not good. And I think that helps us build a theory and also build better tools. I just want to encourage that kind of rigorous evaluation and all the work in this area. I thank Tom Furness and Marilyn Mantei. I thank James Martin. The crew here has been terrific today, and we thank you for your participation, your questions, and glad you could participate in User Interface Strategies 93. Thank you.